My name is Claire Jory. I'm the Marketing Director at Domini Impact Investments. And I would like to thank all of you and the panelists for being here for this first of Domini Community Forum. And I would also like to thank the Solutions Journal and Bard MBA in Sustainability for being our partners for this very first webinar of this series. The webinar itself is presented by Domini Impact Investments LLC. And for those of you who don't know Domini, Domini Impact Investments is a women-led SEC registered investment advisor based in New York City and totally focused on impact investing. We have been pioneers for the last 25 years in this field. And if you want to look up domini.com, you'll find out a lot more about the founder, the CEO, and many of the works that we've done. And today there's a Q&A possible, a Q&A button possible at the bottom where you can ask questions. There's also a little chat button, but we'll more address the Q&A in the second half of this webinar. And we'll also provide a recording afterwards. Now I'm going to pass the stand, or I'm going to let Beth Caniglia, Editor-in-Chief of the Solutions Journal, present the panelists and tell you more about her journal.
All right, so thanks so much, and thanks everyone for being here today and for joining us for this timely conversation, especially in the midst of COVID-19 and the various challenges to our economy that we're experiencing at this time. I'm excited that we're going to be able to have a conversation with our panelists about rebuilding after COVID-19 and creating a regenerative economy. At the Solutions Journal, we specialize in supporting those responsible for implementing sustainability on the ground by connecting them with the solutions they need to succeed. We're thrilled to bring you this really exciting group of panelists, and it includes Susanna Buck, who serves as Senior Impact Investment Associate for Domini Impact Investments, Caravaggio Caniglia, Presidential Scholar and published author, and perhaps most notably, Hunter Lovins, who's President of Natural Capitalism Solutions and author most recently of A Finer Future, Creating an Economy in Service to Life. As a renowned author and lifelong champion of sustainable development, Hunter has consulted on business, economic development, sustainable agriculture, energy, water, climate policy for scores of governments and communities and companies worldwide. In the United States alone, she's consulted with heads of state, departments of defense, energy agencies, and hundreds of local and state agencies. Hunter strongly believes, as she'll tell you, that citizens, communities, and companies who are working together within a regenerative market context are the most dynamic problem-solving force on the planet. And she has dedicated her life to building the kinds of teams that can create these practical and affordable solutions to the challenges of achieving sustainability. Hunter has received literally dozens of awards, both for her sustainability work and for her writing. She was honored with the European Sustainability Pioneer Award, the Right Livelihood Award, and Time Magazine named her a Millennial Hero for the Planet. It's impossible in our short time together to do justice to her noteworthy contributions and all of the accolades she has received. And so I'm thrilled to just hand it over to you, Hunter, as our keynote guest today.
Beth, thank you so much. And thank you, Claire, Susanna, Domini Community Forum, Solutions Journal, for which I happily write whenever I can get around to it. And of course, the Bard MBA at which I teach. And thanks to all of you from the Bard MBA who are tuning in. We're in trouble. I think you know that, or you'd be off playing tiddlywinks today. We're, as a planet, living beyond the planetary boundaries. We're in a global climate crisis. At the same time, we're in a loss of biodiversity crisis. And of course, these two are intertwined, as they are with the, the crisis du jour of the COVID pandemic. As the world warms, we will have more pandemics. As we humans go further and further into intact ecosystems and mess around in there, we are going to encounter more of the viruses that the intact ecosystems had kept where they belonged. And this is far from the worst virus that could be afflicting humanity. So as many people have said, as Buckminster Fuller suggested quite some time ago, this is humanity's final exam. We're going to learn to get it right. Or, you know, as Janine Benyus, the founder of biomimicry, says, failures are fossils. There's nothing that says humans have to hang around, but I'm a little sentimental about this human experiment. When rabbits are threatened, they freeze. When humans are threatened, we entrepreneur. And we have all of the solutions that we need to solve the crises that we're in. And indeed, as the title of my recent book says, to create an economy in service to life. And this is perhaps the best definition of a regenerative economy. A regenerative economy is founded on the concept of human dignity and of equity, equality, inclusion, diversity. The best definition of what regenerative is comes from my colleague John Fullerton, who was co-author with me on the book A Finer Future. He laid out 8 principles, and I highly commend to you that you go to the website of Capital Institute, download his seminal paper, Regenerative Capitalism, and learn these 8 principles. They are drawn from the way nature does business. They are, as best as John can put them together, universal principles. This is how the universe operates. And Bucky, by the way, shared this opinion, said regenerativeness is the core of the universe. In a human context, it is an economy that delivers well-being to us all, meets human needs abundantly, but does so in ways that strengthen our natural and social life support systems. So some examples. We know how to provide abundant, affordable energy to every human on Earth. And indeed, if we simply follow basic market principles, we will do this by 2030. We will be entirely renewably powered. Why? Because it's cheapest. And this is why you are now seeing companies like Shell Oil write down billions of dollars in stranded assets. Why are they doing that? Well, Carbon Tracker told them some years ago that the about to be stranded fossil assets amount to about $25 trillion worth of investments we shouldn't have made in the first place. Look, when the Kentucky Coal Museum puts solar on its roof because it's cheaper than hooking to the coal-fired grid at their doorstep, the era of fossil is over. Abu Dhabi just won what I've been calling the Walmart Award for Everyday Low Price, which is solar at 1.3 cents a kilowatt hour. Previously, that had been held by Portugal at 1.6 cents a kilowatt hour. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power just signed up utility scale solar plus storage. That means fixed firm baseload power at 2.9 cents a kilowatt hour. Just running a natural gas plant, which had heretofore been the cheapest, 4 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Coal plant, 6 to 10. Building a new nuke, 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Running a nuke, 6 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Just do the math, as Bill McKibben says. And when you do, you realize that there is no reason we should be spending $5.2 trillion a year subsidizing fossil energy. That's you and I and the rest of the world's taxpayers are subsidizing the wrong kind of energy. So again, let's just start applying some basic market principles. Same thing in agriculture. We subsidize industrial agriculture to the tune of $1 million a minute worldwide. This goes to the big farmers who now put 10 calories of energy in for every 1 calorie of food value they get out. This is daft. We know how to meet our food needs locally, sustainably, regeneratively. And when we practice regenerative agriculture, we take carbon out of the air and we put it back in the soil, which is where it belongs. So farmers like Gabe Brown. Gabe was a North Dakota corn, soybean commodity farmer who was going broke. Because he was going broke, he said, look, I'll try anything. He switched first to no-till, stopped breaking the soil. When the pioneers came across the Great Plains, they found 10 feet of thick black soil. That black was carbon. As we've plowed it, we've decarbonized it, we've denitrified it, and nitrous oxides are another greenhouse gas. Agriculture contributes about 1/4 of the harm to the climate crisis. So Gabe stopped breaking the soil, then he planted cover crops, then deep-rooted cover crops that take the carbon deep into the soil. Then he had all this vegetation on his ground, so he turned his cows out to eat the cover crops. Then he drill seeded his corn, soybeans. Gabe now produces about 8 separate products profitably. And he has noticed that in the time he has been doing this, he's gone from a little under 2% soil organic matter to now 11% soil organic matter, and on some of his plots, 15% soil organic matter. Every 1% soil organic matter is 5 tons of carbon and 20,000 gallons of water holding capacity per acre. Dr. David Johnson at New Mexico State University has shown that you can compost dairy manure and green waste and produce a mycorrhizal inoculant. This is a fungal dust that you spread on ground and get up to 15 tons per acre per year carbon out of the air into the soil. These guys are rolling climate change backward at a profit. And I could cite you hundreds of regenerative farmers, ranchers around the world who are producing healthier food at lower cost and solving the climate crisis. If we were to do this on all of the world's grasslands, this does not mean taking down standing forests. Standing forests are a critical part of the climate solution. We need to leave them standing. But just using the existing world's grasslands and manage them regeneratively, over 30 years' time, we would get back to 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is the pre-industrial level. So we know how to solve the climate crisis at a profit. And if you just go through issue by issue by issue, there are examples somewhere on earth of people solving these problems. And that's why we wrote this book, A Finer Future, to show what's being done. I started the first chapter, as I started the talk today, of really, no kidding, folks, we're in trouble. I then went on for a chapter's length, really, no kidding, we're in trouble. And the early readers said, we can't read it. We just stopped reading. So I rewrote the chapter to be, it's 2050 and we made it. How did we do it? And cited examples from around the world. I just told a story of people living in a world that works for all of humanity, as Bucky called for. And it's extensively footnoted, as is the whole book, showing that this is possible. What can you do? Start implementing it. Wherever you are, start living just a little bit more regeneratively. Take a look at John Fullerton's 8 principles and think about, how do I apply each one of these in my life on a daily basis? Don't try to do it all at once. Don't think you have to take all the world's problems onto your shoulders, but get a dot. Do one thing. Every day, ask yourself, what's my dot? every day. And do that. It may be buying locally from local farmers, to finding out where your farmer's market is and buying as much as you can of the food that you need from people that you can talk to face, and learn how it is that they're managing their ground and have a real conversation. Stop wasting energy. Use more efficient devices and switch to renewable energy. I've got a 5 kilowatt solar array on my ranch. Batteries, Simplify batteries. These are brilliant little batteries that don't get hot. You know, you hold your phone up to your ear, it gets hot. That's because the battery is lithium ion cobalt. Cobalt's a conflict mineral. We don't want to be mining conflict minerals. The Simplify batteries are lithium ion ferrous phosphate. They don't get hot. They aren't toxic. They're not a conflict mineral. They work crackers. When the power went out for a couple days not too long ago, I had power. You can do the same thing. This is an issue of resilience. And in an unpredictable world, resilience is a good thing. We all can be moving more toward resilient communities. When you buy a product, buy it from a company that is taking a more responsible position. Get politically active. We've got an election coming up this fall. On that probably turns the future of the world. If you're not registered, please get registered. Learn the issues, get involved, and God damn it, vote. Thanks.
It's always so motivational to hear you speak, Hunter. And it's always exciting too, I think, for all of us to remind ourselves of the things we can do and the way that technology is changing so that it can empower us to make a difference. And it's definitely true that the collective work that we do, you know, I've seen so many of our readers here, our contributors, folks who followed you and worked with you around the world, folks that already are, you know, highly engaged with Domini Impact Investing. It's so exciting to have this audience here today. So on that note, I want to bring in Susanna Buck. As I mentioned before, Susanna works at Domini Impact Investing. And, you know, Solutions Journal has been working for a long time, as our readers know, to promote solutions that advance sustainability and regenerative finance. And we're particularly excited, Susanna, by the work that you guys are doing at Domini to connect your commitment to climate to various key performance indicators dealing with soils and forests. So can you tell folks a little bit more about that and the work that you guys are doing in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So finance does have a big role to play in creating a regenerative economy, believe it or not. And I can talk a little bit generally about what investors can do. And I think I'll get a little later into the mental shift that needs to happen so that we are all implementing those solutions that Hunter enumerated. But right, all finance has impact. It can be negative, it can be relatively neutral, or it can be positive. And it becomes positive when investors are using the tools at their disposal to work at the right leverage points to create change. And forests are an area where we think investors need to do a lot more. We think it's an overlooked macro risk, right? That forests are a key part of climate. And right, when forests are degraded, you get more zoonotic diseases. You know, it harms agriculture, certainly, but it also is very much connected to the climate. And we could be getting to a point where we're hitting tipping points where loss of forests, not only is it contributing excess carbon, but for example, in the Amazon, we're at about 18% deforestation. If we get to 20%, a little bit above, we could get that sort of an effect where it turns all over to savanna. And in the boreal forest in Russia, you know, if we get warming, more deforestation and drying, we could get sort of seasonal wildfires raging, which obviously would then, you know, again, get into an effect that would be dramatically felt across sectors. And that's really the point we want to make, that like climate change, forests are important across a huge array of sectors. So yeah, as you mentioned, key performance indicators are one tool. So investors, one of their big tools is setting standards internally, externally, and that can be key performance indicators, it can be investment belief statements, it can be investment standards. And that gives a very important market signal, and it also is a way to hold investors to account, both internally and externally. So we have an impact belief statement, but we also published a forest beliefs and principles so that we can hold ourselves to account, but others can hold us to account to make sure that we are acting within those principles. And then we have key performance indicators which govern our research. And part of the idea there was we wanted to show that forests are important to this wide swath of industries. So it's not just those traditional industries that do cause a lot of deforestation that sometimes investors focus on. So unsustainable palm, soybeans, cattle, forests, just getting those folks to no deforestation. We really want to move beyond that to for those folks, help them think about not only mitigating their harm, but really what they can do, why they need to act, because they also depend on forests. Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, getting to other industries, right, like banks that need to do more in terms of their project lending to create and incentivize sustainable forests, healthy soils, stable climate. But also, even those companies that really only depend on ecosystem services, like a pharmaceutical company, which actually use a lot of raw genetic material from forests, they're not causing deforestation, but they still need to be actively working to find solutions to protect that genetic material that they depend on. So when those types of standards are applied in an investment process, your investments look different. And when that happens across the whole industry, you really do get systemic effects. But of course, this can't happen, one actor by one actor. We all need to be aligned on, well, what's the problem and what are the solutions? What are our goals? And that happens when folks work in coalition. So that's one of the big tools that investors have. They can work in engagement coalitions with their peers. They can engage their clients, which might often be big institutional investors. They can work with the companies they own to really make the case not only that they need to have a no deforestation policy, but that they depend on these systems and they need to do more for their own business's sustainability to protect them. And you can also include policy work. There was recently an investor letter that went out to Brazilian embassies all around the world to say that the strategy of saying the Amazon is open for business is bad for business. We don't want to see that. And if that continues, we're going to have to divest from Brazil, which is not what we want. But, that's not actually the way that, that you support business. And, can even, like in California, there was policy up recently for preferential purchasing from companies that have no deforestation or even advanced policies. So that kind of policy work can tie in too. So essentially, there's a lot that investors can do, right? To think about companies that are not just mitigating harm, but going to that next level, whether it is, like Hunter said, carbon farming, using regenerative agriculture practices to sequester carbon in soil, or even using natural solutions like restoring mangroves or peatland as part of their general corporate climate commitment. And, there are myriad benefits from healthy, intact forests, but we really need to get to that climate action part of the equation, where they're really a source of carbon capture rather than, pushing us over the tipping point.
Yeah, on that note, thanks for bringing up carbon capture for sure. Obviously forests are amazing sinks for carbon. And as Hunter said in her initial talk, we need those standing forests to remain in place. We happen to have an expert on the panel, Caravaggio Canelia, who can talk to us a little bit. Caravaggio, can you provide us with a little bit of context regarding the challenge of carbon sequestration, both on the biological side, but also on the technological side, and some of the existing limits to the capability of forests to meet these needs?
Okay, sure, yeah, thanks. And I mean, first off, I just want to say thanks. It's been such an honor to be, on this webinar, and I've learned a ton in the past few weeks, just talking to everybody. I mean, particularly when it comes to soil carbon sinks, I was aware that they existed. I was not aware of the size. And the scale there is just massive. The political obstacles in the way of taking advantage of that scale are, you know, the news seems to be a little bit more encouraging on that front than it was when I wrote the article from Solutions, and I think that affects a little bit of my attitude towards, you know, how much technological sequestration is necessary. Yeah, I mean, just as far as carbon capture is concerned, it's a developing technology. You can capture carbon dioxide at emission point sources. You can capture carbon dioxide directly from the air. The costs associated are different. There hasn't been a ton of success in experiments so far with capturing from point sources, but it'll probably be an important technology to keep in mind as we go forward, just on account of there are certain industries like cement manufacture that are probably going to be you know, a big part of the economy and a big part of the built world for a long time to oh, okay. Yeah, so I guess a little bit of figures here. As far as the soil sequestration, that figure was only down to 2 meters. So there's, you know, a lot more that could be put back there. And that's just an enormous carbon sink. But yeah, so I guess if you could advance one slide, maybe. Yeah, so I guess there are challenges as far as soil sequestration, the politics, as far as direct air capture, the expensiveness of it. The current cost of sucking carbon out of the atmosphere is higher than even estimates for the social cost of carbon. So that's something that needs to come down. And then there are also issues with, you know, the carbon being used in enhanced oil recovery, which obviously isn't the goal. But yeah, it's a developing technology. Certain industries like cement, it'll probably, you know, be somewhat necessary. I guess I was in more of a pessimistic state of mind in the winter regarding, you know, the political possibilities of things like changing the agricultural system and changing the energy landscape and installing a smart grid in the United States. But things seem to be a bit more encouraging now.
Hunter, did you want to chime in on that? It looked like you had something you wanted to say. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on carbon capture.
Sure. There's a man named Peter Fikowski who leads a group called Healthy Climate that who's convinced that humans cannot be wise enough to do the right things, and therefore direct carbon capture will be necessary, along with a massive amount of geoengineering, some of which is actually interesting. There's a phenomenon called marine cloud brightening that may have some promise. The problem I have with all of these is the cost. Direct air capture can run up to $1,000 a ton captured. Compare that to what Gabe Brown is doing, making his farming profitable because he's capturing carbon and putting it into the soil. Caravaggio's absolutely correct that the political climate is challenging. The big industrial ag boys are very fond of doing things the way they've always done it. And so it's actually surprising to me how fast in the last year regenerative agriculture has had real uptake. In part, I think, because of the challenging economics of agriculture. And if you can do it profitably, why not? Which is why Gabe Brown did it, why Will Harris did it. Joel Salatin, I think, did it out of basic philosophical principles. He's the guy written up in Michael Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma. He will only sell within 100 miles of Polyface Farm in Swope, Virginia. But both Gabe and Will mail order. So if you can't find regenerative beef, chicken, Iberico ham that's regeneratively grown in your local area, go to Nurtured by Nature, which is Gabe Brown, White Oak Pastures, which is Will Harris, and buy all you want.
That's great. Susanna, I'd love to hear a little bit. I know you guys have done a lot of work on the metrics involved in meeting those key performance indicators. And a lot of the background research you all did at Domini pertains to the power of forests to be able to sequester this carbon. And so what are some of the key findings that you might have to share with us on that potential?
Sure. I mean, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported that restoring landscapes and forests and decreasing deforestation is one of the most cost-effective options to combat the impacts of changing climate. So, that it's not only affordable, but it does have all of these other myriad knock-on effects for biodiversity, for sort of local climate, water, clean water, healthy soils. So, I think that they sort of, again, we're kind of issues of dollar value versus all the other intrinsic values of forests that we really don't have a good handle on how to value. And so we are looking for indicators of companies thinking about those, maybe hard to price values when they're implementing solutions, whether it's, within their own agricultural activities or within their carbon and climate change mitigation activities. But of course, sequestration is never going to be enough if we keep emitting more. So at the end of the day, the way that we do business has to be transformed. Overall economic activities have to produce fewer emissions. So, that's also what we're looking for across businesses.
Right, and Caravaggio, I think in your paper, you talked about how far away we are from these technologies being, reasonably priced. Can you just give us, a little bit of your insight in terms of how long it might be before we're ready to get these up and running?
I mean, sure. I guess I mostly, follow the direct air capture industry as far as these companies are concerned, and Climeworks in Switzerland has about a 10-year time frame for getting their price down to $200 per ton, and they think that they'll drop it to $100 per ton, which is kind of in the range of where you could start using the tax system to incentivize it. In the couple years after that, but the technology is a ways out, and point source capture has been tried at a few coal plants, and there are also issues with how much energy it takes to run the carbon capture facilities. It's an area with a lot of research, and because oil companies are kind of trying to save their own skin, it's an area that's probably going to be reasonably well funded going forward, and I think that research could have some downstream, benefits for the environment. It's certainly not a bad thing to have, evil lobby, like a broken clock's right twice a day. Essentially, it's not a bad thing for an oil company to be lobbying for lower carbon emissions. But yeah, the technology is a long way out.
Well, hopefully, we can follow your lead, and I think it was interesting in your paper that you talked about the fact that this might be the way that we have to go. I know that Claire's going to link in a copy of your paper to the follow-up of this webinar. So if folks want to go and read it, it's a very interesting elaboration of where carbon capture technology is at this point in relation to its cost. So I'm sure people will want to follow up with that. So we're really glad to have you here, Caravaggio. Hunter, I wanted to throw a question off to you if I could. You're such a global expert in the regenerative economy generally, and you shared with us a lot of insights in the beginning. Can you kind of hone that down and really talk a little bit about how the finance sector specifically can help us to move that needle towards shared prosperity on a healthy planet?
I love that you use that phrase. That is the phrase that a group of us came up with as the substitute for the neoliberal markets are perfect, governments are evil, the individual is the only legitimate economic actor. And we wrote a document called the Meadows Memorandum to try to counter the Powell Memorandum that unleashed neoliberalism across the world. We haven't got that one done yet, but we're working on it. The finance sector is arguably the sector that can turn this around. Susanna is quite right. All investment has impact. And John Fullerton has a paper out arguing that we actually need to limit investment. If there are limits to growth, and we're seeing them now as we exceed the planetary boundaries and lose biodiversity the world around, then there must also be limits to investment. This is a thesis that the investment community has not even started to wrap its head around. But the question then becomes growth of what and investment in what? There's some things that we need more of: happiness, education, arts, culture, solar panels, all of the aspects of the regenerative economy we need more of. So this is what investment ought to be going to. So when young Greta Thunberg got 8 million people into the streets last September, it was very shortly thereafter that you saw outfits like Goldman and Larry Fink at BlackRock and the European Investment Bank, which just recently said the recovery needs to be green. This grew out of a paper that Sandrine Dixon de Cleve and I put in Solutions Journal that argued that we're spending trillions of dollars now around the world. Let's spend them on the right things. And in the wake of that paper, the Ursula von der Leyen at the European Commission said the European money for the recovery has to be tied to the European Green Deal. Merkel in Germany came out with a much stronger Green Deal even than the EU. And the EIB came out and said the recovery has to be green. So here in Colorado, been asked by the governor's office to lead an effort to say, what would a regenerative recovery look like? And so we've been having a series of convenings done by the Alliance Center, bringing together experts from around the state to talk about how do you do this in energy? How do you do it in agriculture, water? What's our climate solution? What's the infrastructure that we need? What's the natural infrastructure that we need? Forests are a part of a natural infrastructure. And we can, I think, community by community. Kate Rayworth, the author of Donut Economics, has gotten Amsterdam as a city to say our recovery is going to be based on donut economics. This is this concept you need to be below the planetary boundaries and above the human minimums. This sweet, safe, and just regenerative operating space for humanity. So Amsterdam is doing that. I talked to a staffer for a city council person in Los Angeles. LA is now looking at talking to Kate. Cities around the world are talking to Kate and starting to apply donut economics to how their recovery is framed. There is, people sometimes say, how do you stay optimistic? I just look at the good news. It's popping up everywhere these days. And we have this once in a lifetime, hopefully, obligation to build back better, to bounce forward, to deal with this crisis that we're in the middle of, this global economic collapse, by committing ourselves to invest in the things that are worth having more of, to invest in the companies that are doing this. And as Lucian points out, what John Fullerton called that we stand against is speculative investment. Investment that's just trying to generate more money, that isn't investment into the real economy, the things that we all need to have fulfilling lives.
That's a perfect segue, Hunter. In our conversations as we were preparing for this webinar, one of the really interesting things that came up and what was kind of hard for all of us to put our finger on was the way that values, play a role in the way that finance is operating to either move the needle on sustainability or keep it where it is, right? And so if we can have a brief conversation just about the types of values that currently exist in finance generally, and where the values, are moving and where they need to move in areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at social justice, as you mentioned, recognizing the importance of natural capital, which has been in our, obviously in your vocabulary for quite some time, but moving the needle in finance toward that. And Hunter, if you can start, and then I'd love to get Susanna to chime in on that.
Janine Benyus pointed out a long time ago that in nature, the most abundant ecosystems are where two come together, where a river meets the ocean in an estuary, where a meadow meets the forest, because you have diversity. Michael Porter was once trying to identify what are the precursors to success in economic development. And a factor that popped up way above all the rest was the prevalence of homosexuals. And he said, what? And he thought about it for a while, and he decided it's a surrogate correlate. Gays go where they are tolerated, where there is diversity, where people celebrate diversity. And where you have diversity in a human community is where you have innovation. It's where you have the success in economic development. So if what we want is a more abundant, more vibrant economy, we have to have this diversity. The current assault on immigration is so wholly un-American. Every one of us is an immigrant, or we are from immigrant stock. We are not the Native Americans. We were not here first. We came here. And one, we've got to honor the ancestors on whose land we stand. And it's worth finding out, who are those ancestors? On whose land are you now living? And at a minimum, honoring them and raising up the communities of these indigenous people who are left and ensuring that they have a voice, participation in the economy. One of John's principles is empowered participation. And we've got to address these issues of inequality. New study just out this morning, or I just saw it this morning in the Twitter feed, about how COVID is correlated, the incidence of COVID illness is correlated with inequality. This builds on the great work of Richard Wilkinson, Kate Pickett in the UK, who have shown that inequality in society is causative of murder, of low birth survival, of all of the social ills that we say we want less of. So if what we want is this livable society, it is incumbent on each one of us to work for greater equality, inclusion, diversity. These aren't something that it's the moral thing to do. It is, but we ought to do it for our own self-interest. This is what will give all of us a richer society, richer in terms of money. Another of John's principles is holistic wealth. Money's useful, but it's not wealth. Wealth is well-being, it's belonging, it's having a sense of purpose in your life. We can build this society that we all want to live in. But to do that, we have to have racial justice. We have to have climate justice. We have to have gender justice. And it turns out if you have more women on your board of directors, the company performs better. Surprise. New paper out showing that the countries around the world that have best dealt with the COVID crisis have women as their leaders. The worst performing have narcissistic males. Surprise.
Do you want to follow up on that, Susanna?
Yes. Well, so yeah, absolutely to all of that. I mean, just on the sort of diversity point, diversity is key to resilience. And what we've seen during the COVID crisis has really been an indictment of this efficiency at the cost of resilience. But that really gets to the major paradigm shift that needs to happen in investing. Traditional investing says all of these concerns, A, they're sort of out of our control, and B, even if they were in our control, that we're looking at such a short time span that they're not material to the indicators that we're looking at for wealth. And we've gotten this very extractive economy. And for all of these policies and solutions to take hold, the investment community needs to understand that they've gotten away with sort of an extractive way of working for a long time, but there's a limit, right? And now we need to be stewards. We need to understand that social and environmental systems underlie our portfolio value. So yeah, even if we just care about the money part, even though there are all of these other benefits, we have to actually think a little bit further out, think about the different possible futures, different 2050s that we want to see, and what our role is in either not achieving it or achieving it. This is a little bit what the task force on climate-related financial disclosures has sought to do. But we have to expand our understanding of our role in broader systems, in system health, consider value differently, just not that short-term financial value as a lot of folks have talked about for many years now, and consider different time horizons under which we understand that to manifest, right? Sustainability issues, for the most part, are these longer-term risks, and you do have to do a little bit more imaginative thinking to understand the value that you're going to get when you're implementing solutions.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have a few questions from the audience I'd like to throw out to you guys as we're having this conversation. One highly relevant, it says, given the volatility of the stock market, as we've seen it going up and down during this COVID crisis, how can we frame conversations to make people more receptive to pulling their money out of traditional stocks and putting them into what is known as ESG, or environmental, social, and governance types of stocks at this point in time? Either of you, I don't know. Yeah, sure, Hunter, go ahead.
Great new book, Put Your Money Where Your Life Is, by Michael Schumann. Michael is a co-professor at the Bard MBA in Sustainable Management, is one of the reigning experts in local community economic development. And what he's showing is you can put your personal money into your local economy in ways that are, in many cases, safer than putting them into the stock market. It's a brilliant treatise on precisely what you do to get your money out of the casino that is the Wall Street stock market. For people who want to know how to do local community economic development, you can go on the Natural Capitalism website, and I'll put that in the chat box, and get our laser tool, Local Action for Sustainable Economic Renewal. This is free to download, and it's a step-by-step, how do you build a sustainable, regenerative economy in your community.
Susanna, what do you feel are the key pulls, that bring people into creating, that ESG portfolio as opposed to a standard portfolio for their investments?
Sure, I think people often start at the negative screen, right? They don't want to be invested in for-profit prisons, in heavy weaponry. They don't want to be invested in oil and gas and coal. And that's often what brings people to, this field. And then that's when they get excited about the solutions piece of it, right? Not just taking money away from companies who, they believe have a business model that is not sustainable, but really looking for those companies that are trying to create solutions, something that you proactively want to be investing in, exactly, that you want more of. And so it makes sense that you would, be trying to allocate that way. And then of course, it's not just the allocation decision, it's, a lot of folks do engagement work, talking to the companies, voting their proxies can also send strong messages to companies. And so you got these different layers of impact that I think folks get very excited about.
Absolutely, I agree. This has been a really exciting webinar. We've just reached sort of the end of our time. If a few people want to stay on and have a little bit more of a chat, feel free to do that. We do have a question about carbon capture, but if you need to jump off now, feel free to do that. Thank you everyone for joining us. It was really great to see you guys here. Claire, did you want to jump in?
Hi, I would just like to thank all of you for being here, and we hope we'll have you back for some more interesting webinars. And thank you so much to the panelists.
And as Beth said, if you all want to hang out, I'm here. Happy to chat.
Yeah, we'll look for those last comments coming in on the chat box. Otherwise, everybody have a great day.
Okay, cool. We've got some questions. Susanna, how's Domini supporting and investing in regenerative agriculture?
Sure. So, we are investing in large companies, but one of the things that we do, and a lot of, similar firms do is engage with the companies we hold. So not only do we have a lot of KPIs that make sure that we're not investing in, the sort of very bad actors in industrial agriculture, and there are many of them. So, you're not going to see any big meat companies up in our holdings, but we are working, with those best actor companies to really understand, how they're implementing regenerative agriculture, how they're thinking about it in their operations, and really more and more are. We've been heartened to see, but then working to understand what those best practices are, and then how we can share them and make the case for other similar companies to adopt them, so that we can really scale that impact. Because both sort of investors and companies sometimes have a bit of an adversarial relationship, and we really want it to be, well, we have the same goals. How can we help you achieve them, and really have it more of a collaborative engagement relationship.
We had another listener, participant, ask us a question about the new WRI report on the limits to carbon sequestration. I'm wondering if you guys have some references that you might send folks to, and that we can perhaps, Claire, link some papers to the follow-up, the website that has the recording.
A conventional wisdom is that soils can only absorb so much, because you take a measure of what an intact forest has as carbon in the soil, and you take a look at how much carbon is in agricultural soils, and you measure the delta, and therefore that's all they say that soils can soak up. That's just not true. And what we're discovering is, as Dan Daggett wrote in his great book, Gardeners of Eden, we need to be gardeners of the earth in the areas where we have disturbed the earth. In intact wilderness, leave it the hell alone. But if we're talking about farmland where there has already been human disturbance, we need to manage that ground using these regenerative principles, using nature's principles. And so far, we have not found an upper limit to how much carbon can go into the soil. Forests, in many cases, have fairly shallow roots. Particularly, this is true in rainforests. But the deep-rooted prairie grasses and the other cover crops have roots 10 feet or more deep. Just how that 10 feet of thick black soil got onto the prairie. So it's a corollary of the round earth theory that there are limits. And yes, there is an upward limit to how much the soils can absorb. But that upward limit is way beyond what it would take to soak up all of the excess carbon that humanity has emitted. And this is this calculation that I gave you before. Over 30 years' time, we can get back to 280 parts per million concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere if we manage the world's grasslands regeneratively.
That's really exciting. We have a person who asked a question about regenerative agriculture, specifically water and irrigation. And so I wondered if, Hunter, you're probably the best person on the line to address that question, just to see what are some of the exciting developments in irrigation and water management for regeneration.
There are so many. We over irrigate because in many areas, we flood irrigate for several reasons. One, the farmer has the water right. This is everything west of the Mississippi in the United States, where there is allocative water law. And if you don't use it, you lose it. And water rights are, in many cases, far more valuable than the land itself. So farmers just throw water onto the ground. That then washes off any chemicals that you've put on and a great deal of your topsoil. Far better practice would be to create markets in saved water so that the farmer can lease the water rights, say to a city that needs it, and get it back anytime they need it, or simply sell it outright in a way that properly rewards the farmer. But again, 1% soil organic matter uptake per acre is 20,000 gallons of water retention. And in a world that's getting hotter and drier, this is going to be incredibly important. If any of you want, Gabe Brown's book is called Dirt to Soil, where he walked through everything that he did. He went into his banker, he said, if water rights are worth whatever it is in his area, $100 a acre foot, can I put on my balance sheet the water holding capacity of my soil now that I've increased the carbon content? He should be able to. It's worth something. But of course, that's not how we do agricultural accounts.
That's a new thing we should advance through RED and other kinds of UN institutions, right? Carbon offset. Now we have water offset. So that would be really cool. One final question that is in our chat, maybe we can talk about this. What are the key barriers, Hunter, to any uptake of regenerative ag? Obviously, the news is very good, but where are we still hitting our heads against the wall?
U.S. Department of Agriculture, agriculture extension agents who took their degree, 50 years ago and have never heard of any of this stuff. Knowledge is, I think, the greatest barrier. The flows of money and investment. We saw this during the COVID shutdown of the meatpacking plants. Our highly industrialized meat production system is designed to grow millions of pigs, chickens, cattle to a particular size and weight because that's what the packing plant is designed to take. Close that packing plant and you're now faced with slaughtering, just destroying millions of animals because if they get bigger, they can't go through the plant. And this is what we saw this late spring. At the same time, the small abattoirs were doing just fine. They're sized appropriately for their community. And so this question of scale, we need to get back to local scale, local production of food wherever possible. And people say, oh, you can't do that. You can't feed the world on smallholder agriculture. Excuse me, that's what feeds the world right now. 70% of the world's food comes from smallholder farmers. And if we want to help food security around the world, help these people get the knowledge of how to do regenerative agriculture, and then open our markets to them. But we ought to be shifting development agriculture to providing food where people are. And then if you have an excess, you can sell it off into the world market.
And that's a key part, right, Hunter? I mean, it's a key part that regenerative is bioregional, you know, in large part, or at least it's most successful when it's bioregionally focused, because you can look at those intersections between the local natural world, local infrastructure, local capital, local human needs and human abundance, right? Can be created most easily in those bioregional centers. So it is definitely a big part of the Fullerton principles, and I think what most of us in the regenerative world have really come to believe is that bioregionalism is just a key central component to creating this regenerative economy. So with that, I just want to thank everyone once again, for coming and joining us today. This has been a really fun conversation. It's always wonderful to see all of you here, all of our readers, all of the folks we work with around the world. So thank you so much, Domini, Claire, Steve, everyone, Hunter, Caravaggio, Susanna, for taking part today. We look forward to continuing our work together in collaboration with all of you and the conversation. So thank you once again. And as Claire says, have a regenerative day.